guys. So when I was originally kind of conceiving this, it was to be in a classroom with you guys, and we would have more opportunities to kind of discuss violence, maltreatment, adverse childhood experiences, but that is no longer the case. So I didn't kind of want to go over that because I know you guys are fairly actually well versed in violence and abuse. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to, real fast, I'm going to share the screen with the Child Abuse Mandated Reporter Training, which is an online training through the state of California. Some of you might have already done this through your jobs. A lot of you are school personnel or childcare providers. So you might have already done this, which is fantastic. But for people who have not, this is what we have to take if we're a mandated reporter. So if we work in a hospital, if we work with children, if we work with older adults, you have to take this training. It is really good. It's much better than the ones that we've had in the past. So I want you guys to start with the general training. So that is linked on Career Courses already as the mandated reporter training. It says that it takes 4 hours. It does not take 4 hours. It takes like an hour. I do like it because it's in Spanish now, which is fantastic. So if you are more comfortable in Spanish, feel free to take it in Spanish. But there are vignettes and questions and videos. So it's a little bit more comprehensive. And so for many of you, this might be interesting and a good opportunity for you. It's good to have this on your resume for sure. You could say that you're a mandated reporter and you took the training through the state of California. If you have already taken the general training or one of these already, please look at maybe doing the medical professional, the mental health, social worker, law enforcement, or even for clergy as well. So if you've already done one of these because of your job, please take another one. The medical professional one and the mental health and the law enforcement are really interesting. And once again, they do not take this long. They all take about an hour. And they give specific situations and concerns for law enforcement providers, which is a nice perspective. Many of us are probably not going to go into that. But it's interesting to see how it is different from law enforcement because a lot of times they will see it, but they kind of see it in a different context than we see it. A lot of times it's more criminal. And then for, I think of a particular interest to this class would be the mental health and social workers. So people who are wanting to be in counseling or therapy. And then for our medical professionals, so some of the students who are working more to maybe go into public health or healthcare as well. So if you haven't done this general training, choose one of if you've already done the general training, choose one of these other ones to do. And if you've never done it before, you need to start with the general training because you can't actually take these other ones unless you've taken the general training first. So depending on the journey you are at right now, you're either going to take the general training if this is your first time taking a mandated reporter training. If you've already done this through your job, you're going to pick another one to take. All right, so I'm going to share this screen again with our slides. And so I thought I'll have you guys kind of do that on your own time, take the training, be able to say that you've done the mandated reporting training now, and put it on your resume. Print out the certificate as well and keep it in your portfolio because that's a nice thing to be able to talk about. It's nice to have portfolios. Sometimes I freak out, or I don't freak out, but I'll like kind of lose my train of thought when I'm having an interview, and it's nice to have a portfolio that you can kind of flip through it and remember all of the cool things that you've done, but you might have kind of forgot about if you have like a panel interview or people are being kind of a little bit intense in it. So that's a great thing. So print it out when you're done and put it in your portfolio for any kind of jobs. I'm not requiring that you guys send me the certification. I am going to trust that you are all juniors and seniors, third year and fourth year and fifth year students, and that you're taking this class and you see the importance of protecting vulnerable people from abuse. So you do not need to send me the link that you have completed that training. I am just going to assume that all the students in the class are going to take it because you see the need and interest in taking that training. I am going to talk about some of the theoretical models and issues within kind of family systems theory as it relates to violence, though. Typically, people like to kind of break it down, at least for theory and abuse, into these three. So a lot of times they like to start with psychiatric and psychology, seeing substance abuse as an addiction, as a change in your brain, the chemicals involved as well. They also like to look at kind of the pathology behind it and the reasons why you kind of have the addiction. So that's interesting. It's kind of a more medical, more psychiatric, more medication, and then also kind of looking at the psychological reasons and the individual reasons as well. If we were to look at sociocultural, though, this would be a little bit more of the community, so that we have a culture of violence where we, regularly hurt and hit young children, even if it's corporal punishment, spanking. We hurt and hit the youngest and smallest members of our society. So we are kind of perpetuating this culture of violence with our youngest children. And then also the patriarchy as well. If we were kind of looking at traditional feminist theory, seeing that we kind of have unequal statuses for people based on gender, and how does that kind of lead to violence as well. Men are, domestic violence can hurt anybody. It can hurt men or women, but women and children and women with special needs and women of color are at a greater risk of having violence and domestic violence and intimate partner violence within their lives. And then if we had to kind of do social psychology, I would probably also, this is kind of human development more. This is the things that we're probably more well-versed in. So social learning, social control. I would probably start talking about, you could start at the very beginning with kind of Erikson, Piaget, Bandura, Vygotsky as well, and then Bronfenbrenner's kind of ecological theory. So there's kind of the two within this kind of HD or social psychology. There's the idea of looking at you as an individual, and things that could be modeled for you or things that you can learn through your stage development. And then ecological with Bronfenbrenner is a little bit more community context, but within all of your systems as well. So these are the models that we can look at when we are looking at violence, and one is not better than the other. And that's why when we were kind of talking about the research paper before we went on break, we had a list of all of the different theories that you could draw into this, because there's not one kind of theory or model that at this point can wholly explain all of violence. It's just not something that we have right now. We have lots of ideas about it, but we probably are using quite a few theories to describe it as well. Some of the characteristics of violent or households that have neglect. Typically for the adult, it's something that they've had modeled for them, so that they were raised in violent households. They probably were raised in abusive households and neglectful households. And that kind of trauma and possibly generational trauma is kind of the history and modeling that they've had themselves. And it's really, really hard to kind of break those cycles and ways of parenting if that's all you've had modeled for you. It's not something that you can just kind of do on your own. You need a lot of community support. You need a lot of therapy yourself, and you need a lot of support in kind of your own stress and mental health as well, in order to make those decisions to kind of stop hitting, to stop demeaning, to stop your addiction. That's probably the first place as well. Typically, those people that are violent or neglectful or abuse or are having adverse childhood experiences themselves. So poverty, abuse, parents gone or in prison, and they had a history of child abuse towards themselves as well. There was probably substance misuse, and that's a lot of times we see that from permissive parenting or neglectful, uninvolved parenting. We'll see substance abuse start at an earlier age. There's also criminality and violence towards others, and aggression is its own. I mean, I have a whole separate lecture on aggression. We know that there are biological reasons, and if we are to do brain brain scans on murderers. So people who have murdered and are in prison, their brains and the composition of their brains looks very different than ours does. And it might be something hereditary as well. Some of the child characteristics are the age of the child. So a lot of times younger, a lot of times if they have developmental delays, if they're nonverbal, if they are slow in potty training, if they just have those kind of additional challenges with parenting, for the parent, that can be difficult as well. Gender as well plays a big part in it. And then temperaments. So a lot of times feisty temperaments who have big emotions, big needs, can sometimes struggle or butt heads with neglected parents. And then slow to warm up can be difficult as well because they need just more time to understand situations, and they can sometimes be a target of it as well. More flexible temperaments kind of can fly under the radar, but they might take on more roles and responsibilities with their siblings as well. Environmental factors. So if we're looking at society and community, I think this is a huge reason, and I think that we've long looked at the individual as bad, dysfunctional, wrong. And yes, we do not want you to be violent or neglectful, but we also can't take out the environmental factors of poverty, of adversity, of being in child welfare, or and just neighborhood, community characteristics. Do you have parks? Do you have support? Do you have people that look out for each other? Or do you live in neighborhoods that are gang dominated? And that is the lifestyle that you are being socialized into. So our environmental factors, our socialization, all of those things that Broff and Brenner kind of talked about, if we were to look at violence, I think that this is a great way to see it, because all of that is stress, all of that is modeling, all of that is socialization that you're getting from your community, from your teachers, from your peers, and that can be really difficult as well. If your family is telling you that it is okay to hit, that you should be using a belt or a switch, and you're going to raise a bad or rotten child, it can be really hard to change that if that's the messaging that you're receiving. Or if the only economic opportunity is to be in gangs or to be trafficking or to not be working, then those are the socialization messages that you're also going to be receiving. And then there are cultures. We know that we have different cultural expectations about corporal punishment, about hitting. I think I've said it before, if we were spanking and we went to Sweden, we would be arrested, we wouldn't be in jail. It is absolutely 100% not okay. African nations, though, as a whole, most African nations kind of have a cultural belief in raising children and raising children right, and violence or spanking can be a consequence of that. So we have cultural expectations about violence. When do you cross the line? When don't you cross the line? And then we have the lacks of services in some cultures as well, either because those cultures don't want to take part in them, or because those services are not culturally competent, they're not in the languages that the parents need, or they have some kind of stigma in taking part in those. So those are some of the characteristics. So we have the most kind of reported is neglect, then physical abuse, sexual abuse, kind of emotional maltreatment, medical neglect, and other. I have reported on all of these. I mean, I've been doing this for 19 years, so almost 20 years, and I've reported many times, and I kind of wish that we had the opportunity face-to-face to talk it over, to talk through stories and scenarios, but instead we're going to kind of look at family systems, and then you guys are going to do a discussion as well in your group. But neglect is the easiest to see, the easiest to investigate, the easiest to prosecute. Same with physical abuse because it will leave marks. Sexual abuse because of the signs, I think, and symptoms, and also because we're starting to have better systems for reporting it, and because it's such a necessary stigma within our culture, that if we see kind of signs of it in our community, we're more apt to kind of report it. Otherwise, because like psychological treatment, if you just see somebody yelling at your kid in Walmart, you're like, oh, I just hope that's a bad day, yada, yada, yada. You're not going to report it. But if you saw, a child knowing too much about sex or drawing a picture or something like that, you would be very, very apt to call that very soon. Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen at the rates of neglect. It just means that we have less of the ability to see it and report it as well. So child maltreatment is all of the neglects. So physical neglect, and within neglect, we have kind of passive, which is people just because of their addiction, their mental health, poverty, whatever, cannot provide for their child. And then we have more active neglect, which is where you kind of choose not to provide for the child. I've had to report on both, but if we were looking at the kind of idea of child maltreatment, it would be physical, emotional, and educational neglect. Then it would be physical abuse, sexual abuse, and exploitation, which would include trafficking, and San Diego is a huge trafficking hub, second to like Russia, China, other places like that, because we're on a border, we've got the ocean, we've got rural, we've got cities, so all parts of San Diego County and Imperial, Riverside and San Bernardino are kind of hotspots for trafficking, exploitation, child pornography, and then emotional abuse as well. So all of these, or some of these, can kind of combine to what we might call child maltreatment. So we are going to, we're going to look at the general effects of children's development. So there might be some of kind of the issues with abuse is long-term, the effects on your development. I think the biggest one is the social and emotional, so your self-esteem and concept. So if you're constantly being told you're stupid or an idiot or worthless or you'll never amount to something, how is that going to affect how you see yourself and what you think you are good at? Also, if you are not given kind of that locus of control, if that's not something that's encouraged in you, your response to adversity might be, there's nothing I can do about it. I might as well not try. Bad things just happen to me, and you don't see yourself as an agent of change. You don't see yourself as having that ability to make things happen within your own life. And then just long-lasting mental health concerns. So if you're raised in opportunities where there are adverse childhood experiences, then this can be a long-lasting, lifelong, because some of your stage theory hasn't been met. You've been receiving negative messaging about yourself, and changing those patterns of ways of thinking about yourself requires a very concentrated and large amount of therapy. We might see some impairments also, and mostly we've seen it in executive functioning. So that's your higher level brain functioning. That is the conductor to your brain. That is what allows you to have sustained attention, to learn at a bigger level, to have memory and working memory, perception and speed, and just to be able to think forward, to be able to make decisions that are going to benefit you in the future. Not everybody has executive functioning, and we're seeing with with abuse, we see impairments even on the brain. When we scan abused brains, we see differences in the brain structure and where it lights up or not, because of maybe some sensory deprivation, some of that bad kind of messaging that you're receiving. Somebody who's being violent or neglectful is probably not spending time getting you to school, part of that educational neglect. And then they're probably not working on your development either. And we know that early childhood development in the first 5 years is when all that brain development happens as well. So we are going to look at the reporting requirements, but you guys are going to do that online with that child abuse reporting. And what I would like you to do in your discussion group is look at feedback loops. So are we having feedback loops where we can change or where we are not changing? So the cycle of abuse and ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, can also be a feedback loop as well. So how could we change abuse and ACEs, and how can we change them on both the individual level? So what would an individual need to change their adverse childhood experiences, and what would an individual need, what would a society need on a social level to change abuse and ACEs for young children, like as a whole in a community? So that's something that I want you guys to investigate in your discussion book group with your books. With your book club members. And I'd also like you guys, I'm going to kind of reach out and see how we are doing in our book clubs. I'd like to get them soon so that I can start running them through YouTube and getting them posted so we can watch them over a 2-week span. I know you guys have worked very, very hard, and I am so impressed already with the work that you guys have done on your book clubs. And I am looking forward to the presentations that we will be watching. So otherwise, I will will see you guys online.